We are now.
Okay, thank you.
I
Okay,
can't
it
hear.
is Friday, January 24th, 9:31 a.m., and I call this board meeting to order. Do I have a second?
I second. Is the general
Okay, all
public
in
here?
favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say aye. And,
I,
okay, any opposed?
Christine, Christine, you're,
Paul, you broke up. Say that again, please. You probably
I think
can't hear
Paul's
me. I
frozen.
might be away.
So just for clarification, I'm sorry, are we in public or executive?
This is a public session, so you have about
Okay,
18 attendees along with you all.
okay.
Oh, okay. So we've already started. Ah, okay.
Am I muted? Okay. All right, so everyone was in favor, so it passes. Number 2 on the agenda, approval of consent agenda. Do we have a motion?
I so
This
move.
is the revised minutes from 11/22/24 meeting that we mentioned we were going to change up, and the minutes from the 10/20/24 meeting. Have you all had a chance to look at that?
Was that where we added the documents in?
Yes,
So
so we
that
took out some documents, Dora
Mhm.
reworded as requested, which we all agreed on.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So do I have a motion?
So
Uh,
moved.
I-
So moved.
A second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, it passes unanimously. We're going to move on to number 3, and I want to mention to all our guests, I understand from Dora, we have about 18 people in the waiting room. First, I just want to apologize for being remote. Russ and I actually are at the BHA building, and it was no small feat to get here. The roads are very, very icy. And so I apologize for having to do this remotely. And with that comes the added issue that it might be a little difficult. I speak very loudly, so you'll probably hear me. But if you'll speak rather slowly and loud enough so all can hear, you're able to raise your hand in the waiting room, and Dora will call on you in order. And with that, Dora, do you have any other comments?
uh,
Other than, what do we have? What's the limit? And Dora, go ahead and give instructions to everyone if you would, please.
there's a 5-minute limit. If anybody has any comments, go ahead and raise your hand, and I can go ahead and allow you to speak if you have any member comments for the public session.
Okay, with that, Dora, you can go ahead and open it up.
Alrighty, I'm looking here. I don't see anybody raising their hand at the moment.
There is one.
Well, it's actually John from when he raised his hand before. Let me go ahead and lower that. There we go. Okay. Anybody have any comments?
So, I don't know if this is a place to do it, but I noticed this morning, frankly, I didn't notice it before, that we didn't have financials, a financial review listed. Um, and
I saw that email, John. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so I guess the question is, are we going to review financials? And the other part of that is, do we have the budget with prior year comparisons?
And maybe we can do a twofold quick answer on that if Russ would like to speak up, and then we'll have Paul follow up if he'd like to.
Yeah, John, and I think Leanne's on the line also. Leanne has been working very, very hard on trying to reconcile the numbers for 2024. She's not quite finished with that process. We also have to look carefully at the accruals and the reserves. So that's where it is right now. As soon as that's completed and we feel that we've accounted for everything properly. The board will be aware of that. So, Leanne, anything else you want to add on that question?
Let me let her in real fast.
And I apologize to Leanne, I didn't realize she was on the line.
It's okay. I couldn't talk. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I've, not to make excuses, I've had a lot more to do this year than I've ever had. And Russ and I are going to meet together about the accruals. And I told him I'd be there Monday. As long as the ferry runs, I'll be there. And we'll work hard to get them done and get them out to.
That sounds good, Leanne, and I really appreciate all your hard work. I know that your job description, well, the title is still the same. You kind of evolved and stepped up your game, and we appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if John has a follow-up or if Paul has anything to say.
I have a question. It was the second part of John's question. Russ, when are we going to get sort of a final forecast and comparison against 2024? Line item detail.
Well, that information also would be something that's being completed with the year-end reconciliation. So once that's completed, I can't give you a specific date yet, Betty, but we're that's also on the agenda that should be
Okay.
very soon.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
mean, it's one
yeah.
last thing. I mean, it's year end. A year ago it used to take, we were about a month behind on or longer on our financials, and it's gotten better, much better this year. And but making sure your year end accruals are correct before you post those is critically important, because not getting that correct and it's the end of the year. You don't have any other choice opportunities to clean it up. So that's just the way it goes.
Okay. Thank you for that, Paul. All right, Dora, can we see if there's any other hands up for number 3 member comment time?
I am not seeing any other hands up.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to number 4, director's report. Russ?
Okay, thank you all for attending via Zoom today. Dora, can you pull up the red
I
flag,
can.
please?
Give me 1 second here.
For the benefit of anyone who has not attended a meeting, I do a summary report called red flags, green flags. Red flags meaning things not going quite as well as we would like. Green flags are good trends. So we'll start with the red flags. The first one is anticipation of the ARC guideline simplifications. I know Terry's going to speak about that in a little bit, and I do believe you're going to be pleased with a lot of the work that he has been doing with the committee. So we look forward to hearing that information. We had a recent error by our financial partner, Enumerate. They're the group that does the billing for the club. They went through a process where they sent out a message to the community without our knowledge, and it caused a lot of confusion. It was a mix of emails and texts. It was very unfortunate, talking about a billing methodology, and it caused some confusion, and we're sorry about that. I have had extensive dialogue with their customer support team, and they are going to provide more support for our association as well as for Leanne going forward with training. And they're also going to adjust off some of their charges based on this mistake that they made. So that was unfortunate, but we are trying to move forward. We are going to assess how that works going forward as well. We need to refresh our reserve study for 2025. This is something we have planned for. When the next director is on site, this will be an initiative to consider and also to involve long-range planning committee and the finance committee and the board when that occurs. It's good news that we do have a reserve study in place, and we are starting to reserve dollars for that. But there are ways we can make this better going forward and more useful for the association. And the weather uncertainty that we've all faced this week has been tough. I don't know if it's me or I've been here since late September. I've endured the aftermath of a cyclone, a tornado warning, a hurricane, and now winter storm. So, but something. So I know it's been difficult for everybody and people are getting cabin fever, but, thank you for all your patience as we go through this. And, I think sunny days are on the horizon. Now we go to the better news on the green flags. I think the annual speakers in education are going to be well received tomorrow. Although it will be remote, they all have a lot of important messaging to share with the community, and it does not get old to hear from them. They offer quite a bit for our residents, and we're looking forward to hearing from them as they share that information. The pending election of the directors, that will be resolved after the annual meeting is completed tomorrow at the very end. So we look forward to hearing who's elected, and we appreciate the 5 candidates that have decided to run. It's not easy to put your name out there and to offer this type of service, but we appreciate that very much. We also have a lot of committee applicants for an upcoming rotation that will happen after the annual meeting. We've received over 30 applicants for different committee spots. So this will be a decision that will be made not too long from now in terms of how the committees are going to operate, who's going to be on the committees. And the search for the executive director is coming close to a decision. I think you'll hear more about this very soon, and we look forward to that information as well. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Russ. All good news, except for that's right. We're going to say goodbye to you at the end of the month, and hopefully our weather will improve for the next year. Okay, so we're going to move on to, and we thank Terry Steelman for joining us today. Number 5, ARC language. Everyone welcome Terry Steelman.
Good evening, or good morning, I guess it is. These days are running together. Russ, do you have my presentation available?
Dora has, I think she can up.
I'm sorry?
I believe Dora can pull
I
it
do.
up.
I'm gonna get it ready to pull up here for you, Terry. Just give me 1 second here.
All right. Worst case, I can always share it from here.
Would it be easier for you to share it, or do you want me to share it?
Doesn't matter to me.
Here.
I can share it, Dora, if you would like.
There you are, dear. I just made you a co-host, so it should be able to come up for you.
Okay, so you want me to share it? All right, let me 1 second. Share.
I see a hand up. Leanne has a hand up.
I put it back down. Can you hear me? No, I just wanted to say on Russ's where the third party sent out those notifications. It is never okay for anything you receive from a third party representing us is not okay. You did right. Just contact us and let us know about it, but don't answer it and don't even click on it if you can tell it's not from us.
Good point, Leanne. Thank you.
Okay, Christine, you ready for me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead,
Okay.
Terry. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I have prepared a brief presentation of some work that I have been doing on behalf of the board and the ARCs to try to deal with a number of challenges that we've had in the last probably 6 months. So this agenda is really to talk about what the purpose of these updates are and the goals for the updates, talk a little bit about the review process that we've gone through, and then I will go through in some detail the proposed changes that the ARC has adopted and is putting forth for the board's consideration. So that's the agenda for this. The first part is just purpose and goals for the updates. There's been a lot of confusion over the last several months about topics relative to the 60% undisturbed site area guidelines. So one of the key objectives was to clarify that. In concert with that, to address issues around what is referred to as the 6-foot buffer between the undisturbed and the construction of new structures. And then to also establish clear guidelines for construction activities within the area that's allowed for disturbance, which is the 40% remaining of the lot when 60% is left undisturbed. And then to also clarify and state clearly in one location the measures for minimum and maximum house sizes. I know this has been confusing because it's sprinkled throughout the document, not in a concise location. And then the last thing is to reaffirm key development criteria such as building coverage, setbacks, impervious coverage, and grading areas. So that's been the core objectives of this effort. The process that we've gone through is last summer we had I think it was probably a 4-hour working session with that was an open invitation to architects, designers, builders, homeowners that are working on the island. That was a very instructive period. It allowed the ARC leadership, myself included, to talk a little bit about some of the issues and challenges that the ARCs are facing, but it also was an opportunity to hear back from these constituents the challenges they are seeing with the process. So that was an important meeting that Christine and I orchestrated that was very well received, and I think some positives came out of that. We've had multiple meetings with the board to try to understand the challenges that the board is hearing from the membership. I've taken a very detailed review of the current guidelines to, one, make sure that we understand what the guidelines are intending to say, and then a review of how the ARCs are applying those guidelines. And are they applying them consistent with the intent? Because I guess there has been some question in that regard. As a result of that, I worked to propose some adjustments to the guidelines that we'll review shortly, that I put to both ARC-A and ARC committees. Those committees reviewed those proposals this past week and approved them unanimously for submission to the board. And as process goes, any modifications to the guidelines is to be approved by the ARCs, then put forth to the board for adoption. I might say that this effort has been fairly finite in dealing with the issues that we referred to under the goals and objectives. This is not going to solve all the challenges that are in front of us relative to the guidelines, and I think that will result in a broader effort that we'll undertake in the new year. I mean, later in this year. So, I can pause there for a moment to ask questions, or I can simply keep going and go through the changes that are being proposed. I defer to you, Christine, as to whether or not you want me to keep going or entertain questions at this point.
Does anybody on the board thus far have any questions for Terry, or would you like for him to continue?
I think continue.
No
Okay.
questions from me.
Okay, let's go forward.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go through this and this is tedious because it's particular languages, but I'm going to describe the changes that are being proposed and why. One of the critical, whoops, I went forward. I didn't intend to. One of the critical components is the 60% undisturbed rule. This is an important guideline that is primarily intended to make sure that we preserve the kind of vegetative nature of our island and not have it simply be clear cut for development like we might see on the mainland. This is really central to the kind of character and the ethos of the place. So that currently is, I don't know why this keeps showing. That is currently defined on page 66, Article 3. That language and is being maintained as it exists. There is an addition. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the, one of the things I don't quite understand, and it relates both to approval of new homes, but also the community-wide standards, is what undisturbed means. I mean, I don't.
So, Paul, can I answer that question? Can I answer that question at the end after I've gone through the whole thing?
Sure.
Okay, because I think
That's sort of and it's probably a bigger issue for community-wide standards. But yes, that's fine.
yeah,
That we
yeah,
have.
because
It says I don't think it's defined in the guidelines. It just uses the term.
yep.
So that's
Well,
fine.
I think well, let me just go ahead and deal with it, and then I can tell you how that I've confronted it. Undisturbed is, as we've characterized it, is that it is it remains naturally vegetated. At the end of the project, it is still is naturally vegetated and still in the same condition that it was at the beginning of the construction. Now, through this effort, I will define how that is being protected and or mitigated, and there's conditions for both. So in the proposal, it leaves everything basically as the same, with the exception of dropping the term uh, typical in Cape Fear Station, because at one point that was the case where smaller lots were in Cape Fear Station, but we still have a lot of smaller lots across the island. So that language basically relative to Cape Fear Station has been struck, and I probably should have articulated that in this diagram or this slide. One of the things that has been added is a clearer definition of the boundary between the undisturbed and the disturbed. The existing guidelines refer to limits of construction. Uh, Industry-wide language that is more appropriate is limits of disturbance. And so, I've introduced a article here that refers to limits of disturbance shall be established and delineated on the approved site plan, and the limits of disturbance shall define the boundary of the area that to remain undisturbed, i.e. the 60%. And the limits of disturbance shall be established by fencing and appropriate soil erosion measures prior to any site work. That language basically exists, but sprinkled about other places. But I've pulled it forward so that it's clear where the 60% delineation is defined in the guidelines. So moving on from there, the this is where there's a reference in the current guidelines to limits of construction fencing, which ultimately you'll see down below is being changed to limits of disturbance fencing, and that's just trying to track that change. The one thing that has been eliminated is a piece of language that's extremely confusing and has been a source of a lot of debate back and forth, which is the reference to a 6-foot setback from the limits of disturbance, i.e., or from the undisturbed area, to any face of any new structure. The reason this became a conflict is because it ultimately became a setback from a setback. So part of what is being changed here is, rather than saying, not allowed in setbacks, which can create its own level of confusion because it meant it was only applicable to areas which were setbacks, which is a definition within the guidelines from property line to where a house can be constructed on a lot. So what has really been clarified now is that you cannot clear the understory outside the limits of disturbance, and a reasonable clearance between the structure and the undisturbed area shall be provided as necessary for construction of structures. This provides a degree of flexibility for the contractors in terms of building the house, but it also puts the onus on them relative to means and methods for that construction. Now, in the end, this is a little bit going back to Paul's question. Uh, Currently in the guidelines, it states that any areas outside the limits of construction, currently says that, which we've changed to limits of disturbance, fencing, that are disturbed must be restored to their original natural character. For the most part, if it's anything other than a tree, which cannot be taken down without a tree, which is defined as a natural vegetation that's greater than 3 inches in diameter, 4 feet above the ground. For the most part, that natural vegetation will come back on its own, uh, fairly quickly over time if it has simply been trampled down or disturbed. So the guidelines already provided for some element of mitigation. That has not been changed. So in the end, anything that gets disturbed as a result of the nature of construction has to be allowed to come back to its natural state or be mitigated as necessary, which will be tracked in the post-construction review of these houses, such that in the end, what is left is 60% undisturbed area of the lot. Moving on from there.
One question on, do you anticipate any exceptions to this, or is it, we're going to take people out and shoot them if they have a steep slope behind their house and have to ask the ARC for an exception?
Good question, Joe. So one of the things that I've done, and I have in the back of this slide deck, a series of examples. So what I've also done prior to proposing this to the ARCs is gone through a number of submissions and evaluated them and really pressure tested them against this. One of the things that that I was hoping to find, and I was able to determine, is that when there is a hardship, and that hardship can be lot size or topography or particularly constraining vegetation, there has been and should continue to be an understanding that those specifics should be considered. There is one example, which, I can show you, a very small lot where it was virtually impossible to build a house that met the guidelines that I'm about to talk about, which is house size, um, within reason, and it was allowed to reduce the undisturbed area to 50% in order to build an appropriate house on that lot. So there is good example of the ARCs making those observations. I think we need to be a little bit more disciplined about it sometimes, but I think there is good example of, if there are circumstances that should allow the undisturbed to be reduced in order to build an appropriate size house on a lot, that has been allowed. Okay? Does that answer your
But
question,
it
Joe?
says none. When we built a home, for example, on the artificially constructed fort wall. And one of the sides of the home, you just couldn't get ladders and things in there in the 4 feet. We were allowed to go further than that, but the condition was we needed to do everything possible with the ARC's oversight to restore it to 6 feet.
And I think that's what this language currently allows for.
Okay.
In which it says, any areas outside the limits of disturbance fencing that are disturbed must be restored to their original natural character. I think that is definitive enough and loose enough to accommodate the realities that are confronted with these various lots, none of which are the same.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Okay.
And if, Terry, if I could ask one question, and it's not
Sure.
on is we're focusing on construction, which is obviously important to where these issues have come up. But this exists with these lots forever. So basically, outside this area of disturbance, you have to leave alone. You can't touch, basically, right?
Well, there are guidelines, Paul, within the landscape section that define precisely what you can and can't do in the natural vegetated areas. It is the reason we're focusing on it here is because construction is a naturally disturbing act, whereas day-to-day living on a lot or in a house is much more manageable, and those components are fairly clearly defined in the guidelines under the landscape section, and there was no attempt to modify or address those in this effort.
So let's say we're built before these rules were in. So where we see a lot of lots that are in effect completely cleared and landscaped, that was part of their approval process. Because one of the things I want to make sure, when we change this stuff, we think through the entire process. This doesn't just have, it's not a construction issue. It is a community-wide standards issue. It's a one house versus a next house issue. And I want to make sure we're not. I'm just thinking through the implications beyond the construction period.
And honestly, I think, Paul, part of what is happening, and sometimes it's being blamed on the construction process, but candidly, community-wide standards, are regularly flagging conditions where homeowners are taking down vegetation, that hasn't been approved to be removed. And I think that is a different problem. But I do think that the community-wide standards has been tracking that. I think the question is just what is the resolution once it's observed. But this effort didn't make an attempt to modify any of that. But I do think it's clearly an issue.
I understand. I do think
I agree with you.
There are longer term implications after a house. We want to make sure that we can enforce community-wide standards fairly and consistently, and we don't have a different rule for every house. And I think you understand what I'm getting at.
Yep, I agree with you. All right, so moving on, the next thing that it tries to address, and most of this is really cleanup language, but also trying to address a question that has been raised relative to making sure that the lots are not overbuilt or underbuilt. So the current guidelines refer, and under the size requirements section, make specific reference to how the smallest house that can be built, which is 1,600 square feet heated area, and that probably needs to be more precisely defined as heated area. But that alone, uh, and the notion of largest the largest house that can be defined is sprinkled in very random places throughout the guidelines and the covenants, but broadly understood, island wide. And so this modification is really intended to pull that understanding to one single language in one location within the guidelines. And so where we refer to the minimum size, we've simply put it in here as clarifying what the 1,600 square feet is, which is heated area, which probably should be annotated in red, and a maximum heated area equal to not greater than 30% of the lot area, exclusive of and then added non-occupied accessory buildings. And the reason for the addition of non-occupied is because in a condition where you have an occupied accessory building, such as a crofter, that heated area is to be included in the minimum and or the maximum heated area allowed on any lot. So this is really not a change as much as a cleanup in language, which goes with the second piece, which is Articles 4 and 5, where it is on the next page in the guidelines where this stuff is all kind of redundant. So this whole paragraph is completely redundant on the very next page of the document. So striking that, and then we're pulling out the reference for the 30% because we've picked that up elsewhere. One thing that is important is that we have maintained the definition of the building footprint and grading areas, which cannot exceed 25% of the lot area, which is an important measure in terms of making sure that the lots stay within, the construction stays within the boundaries of the 40% still allowed for construction. So none of that has changed in these modifications. So that is the extent of the guideline changes that are proposed and adopted unanimously by both ARCs. What I did do, just as a matter of discipline, is I went through and looked at a number of applications, some of which were approved, some of which were built, some of which were not approved, to pressure test these guidelines. And I can go through those very quickly. So 2 Coots Court, which I know has been a highly contested application that came through as draft. This house would be able to be built based upon these new guidelines. And I think there were elements of it which made it not being able to be built if the 6-foot rule was applied inboard of the non-disturbance area. Now, this contractor is going to have some responsibility for making sure that, they, work within those boundaries, but that's a means and methods issue that I believe, falls to them in this effort. Another one was, and I can't remember which, this is, I think, 120 North Bald Head Wind, which is, so the first one was a large lot. This is another fairly large lot. This is 10,000 square feet. Again, this one easily passed that, and this house had been approved. And then I looked at a very small lot, which I think this was like 8,200 square foot lot. And this is one of the ones, going back to Joe's comment, or question earlier, which, this house, which is not a very large house, I think the heated square footage on this house was only something like 1,900 square feet. Um, 1,900 square feet. This house, 1,900 square foot house, would not have even been able to be built on this lot, but for some relief. And this house was given relief, and ultimately, they worked hard to stay within all of the impervious building coverage guidelines, impervious coverage guidelines, maximum heated area guideline, and still needed relief from the undisturbed area, and were ultimately provided that relief and left with 50% undisturbed, and then planted a fairly positive landscape plan from a mitigation point of view. So I feel confident that we have dealt with the intent and the challenges and the questions that were coming before the ARC. ARC views these as positive moves forward on the issues that were in front of us. And with that, I will pause and answer questions. It does look like somebody had their hand up in public. Well, maybe that was John Kenny. I don't know who that is.
Yeah, that was me, Terry.
Okay.
Apparently I got dropped off and then I had to re-enter, so I was trying to get on.
Okay, sorry.
I don't know how to put my hand up, but may I ask a question?
I saw your hand, Betty.
Okay. I really spent a lot of time looking through all this language, and I want to commend Terry and all the ARC people for their efforts. The one question I had, and I posed it to Terry, and we talked about it, is on the very first thing that talks about requirements for new construction and major renovation. And Terry, maybe you could put that slide up. I think it's like about the fourth slide. My question is, it says the percentage minimum is a general rule that may vary in application. And I know that we feel strongly that we need to provide that element of variability. But in terms of qualifying how that might be placed into effect, the response I got was it requires a hardship request. And I realized that the people on the ARC committee likely know what that is. But I questioned, should there just be a qualifier in that second sentence that says based upon an approved hardship? So this percentage minimum is a general rule that may vary in application based upon an approved hardship.
Yeah. So Betty, my response to that was there is no harm, no harm intended here, no harm in adding that language to this guideline. I think the covenants in particular define, and I think that's in section 7 of the covenants. They define the sense of guidelines, interpretation, and any place where there is a need for variance, for hardship. I think the tricky part with adding hardship is it then triggers it as a variance process versus if it stayed a general rule, the ARC could simply evaluate the material and the circumstance at hand and say, yes, this is reasonable, without forcing the applicant to go through the process of approving hardship.
And
I can accept either one and defer to the board's preference on that, and we would manage it accordingly.
I in no way want to make it a more cumbersome process. I feel that the ARC has come under ridicule and comment for not applying rules and regulations consistently. And so I'm just trying to say that just because you want to vary it doesn't mean that it can be varied without a further review. So I'm just putting it out there to the board because I think this is one of the things that we have heard repeatedly. We're inconsistent in our application. And I'm thinking, well, do we need to specify that there has to be some type of an approval in order to vary an application? So that was the reason I'm bringing it up, and I'll abide by whatever the comments the board has.
Okay. All right. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question, and it goes back to my definitional. And it's not just the term disturbed, undisturbed. We use a lot of terms in these guidelines that are not clearly defined. And I think if we mean undisturbed, we should define that in the guidelines. Because I can't find any definition of it. It's just what's
Well, and Paul, that's a
disturbed to me.
simple, yeah, and that's a simple thing. We have a fairly precise glossary of terms in the guidelines.
I don't think that's in there.
That's all I was going to say is it's quite easy to add a language there that more clearly articulates the meaning of undisturbed, and I'm more than happy to add that to the document.
Okay, and there probably, this isn't related to what you're presenting here. There's some other terms we use in the guidelines that really aren't clear, like mass. Mass means size, and we talk about massing. I don't know what,
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's. I wouldn't think
we in
I wouldn't
part
think about
rely. Yeah, I'm sorry.
if I tried, it is so generic a term that it's sort of worthless the way we use the guidelines. That ought to be defined. Again, fenestration just means placement of windows. What do we mean by that? So I think for our purposes, we ought to go through and take a look at a lot of those terms because they seem to be used a lot.
Terry probably likes what we're saying because hearing from the outside of ARC, some board members, some of these terms, you're speaking for many other members. And the good news is Terry is willing to listen and look at this kind of stuff and do some work from here forward to do what we've asked, which is make this make more sense for all of our members. I think this is an amazing, great first step. And Terry's already said going into the new year, and Terry, am I putting words in your mouth? But do you like to hear some of these things we're mentioning?
Yeah, no, I all of these, my view is all of these are addressable and fairly natural. So I have no objection to expanding the glossary. I think to date there's been a reliance on the kind of general understanding of what these terms mean within the industries. Because I think the architects and the builders in particular, they know what these terms mean. Homeowners may not as much from a lay point of view, but it is important for all constituents to understand what this language means. So further clarification within the glossary, I think, is perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful because it's become sort of a shortcut, sort of a code within the ARC, and it's not, we're using terms that aren't, that's not how they're defined. That's not this definition. So I think that's a good idea.
I just wanted to weigh in here in terms of, I think what Paul is talking about is really a needed improvement. But I think there's a series of them, and I'm hoping that we as a board are going to discuss in greater specificity when we get to our goals meeting. Where do we want to put our resources and the resources of our volunteers in the upcoming year? And I think we have spoken multiple times that we need to look at process, we need to look at terminology, we need to look at making an efficient use of resources as we apply the ARC principles. And I'm hoping we're going to create a larger commitment, not just a piecemeal commitment to that effort in 2025.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, this is the first I've seen this morning or the PowerPoint. I mean, I think where we can, the more specificity around the guidelines is helpful because it gives more direction to the property owner and to the ARC and less discretion. This is obviously a process that's going to require some discretion, but generally more specificity, I think, is helpful.
I think that's a slippery slope, Paul. I mean, if you want to specify everything, then every home on Bald Head's going to be identical. And we've
Joe,
talked about that stuff for 30 or for probably 40 years. And there has to be, the feeling has always been that there has to be some designed variety available within the guidelines to permit homes to be unique, if you will.
Oh, Joe, I agree with that. I understand that completely. I'm just saying where we can, we should try to get there. No, I understand that, Joe, completely. I just when we can, we should if we're not going to head down that slippery slope. And then I think as we have more defined terms, we're going to review a case in executive session where it's rejected for massing and window fenestration. Well, massing again is just a size and a plate. I mean, you can't define that stuff, but I think we need.
I get what you're
Yes, I
saying,
made my
Paul.
point. Where we can be more as specific, we should, keeping what you're saying, Joe, at top of mind. I agree with you.
That's well put.
I'm in complete agreement with everything that Joe, Paul, and Betty just said, and I think that this is a step in the right direction. Thank you, Terry, for your work on that. This has been very helpful, and you've obviously put a lot of effort and time into this, and very appreciated. I do have one question that actually relates to this concept, which is in your notes that accompanied this presentation. You had indicated that we should add language that clarifies the limits of disturbance, and I think that providing greater clarity and certitude there is going to be helpful for us. The other question that I had related to that is just to ask your thoughts on this. Your notes had indicated we've got to add that language that clarifies the limits of disturbance, which is, I think, a new defined term, and then limits of disturbance must be established and delineated on approved plans, and shall define the boundary of the approved undisturbed area. And I'm just reading from your notes here.
Yeah.
Where in order so we can have as much clarity and guidance to the ARC and remove while providing discretion, but remove absolute subjectivity that is going to cause issues and problems. What are your thoughts about who proposes the limits of disturbance and how we can best put some guidelines around that?
So currently, there is already in the guidelines, there's already a requirement to define the limits of construction, which
Right.
which are defined on the plans. Interestingly, many architects, designers, and even builders refer to limits of disturbance and limits of construction interchangeably. They're not really interchangeable terms, but they already are defining those on the drawings. I mean, if you look at any one of the submissions, I mean, some of the submissions that I showed, they even call it LOD. I mean, which is the industry known term. They refer to it on their plans. So those are already being defined in the submission, either by the designer and or my assumption in concert with the builders and the homeowners. So this is really not so much a change in requirement as much as a change in terminology. And those limits are defined. Now, frequently, what will happen is they will be delineated on the drawings. They will get out to the site and there's a required site visit prior to start of construction with the staff, and they will note something, and they will make a minor modification to that, and that happens, and there's a process set up to accommodate that, those minor modifications to where those limits of disturbance or limits of construction lines are. So I think that is working. So in my mind, this was more clarifying the purpose of the limits of disturbance and cleaning up language than changing any of the rules. Is that helpful, Steve?
It is. Thank you. And I note that the change that you've made in the red line here is on, I guess, page 66 and 67. And those are within the landscape guidelines rather than within the construction guidelines.
Yeah, and the problem, and this is a problem in the guidelines in general, and I think you guys have all heard me refer to this in the past. Where some of this stuff is located is not completely logical and needs to be repackaged from a clarity point of view. I mean, if you recall in my notes, I put all of the construction limiting guideline components on one piece of paper, which, whether or not that's setbacks or grading or impervious or building coverage or heated. I mean, those are sprinkled throughout the document. They need to all be consolidated. That is something that will ultimately have to get cleaned up when the guidelines are repackaged. But probably an effort greater than this task could undertake, I think, at this point.
Sure.
Is that fair?
It is, and I think that's a good suggestion because fundamentally what's gotten us here is and to ask you to visit all this was the inconsistent application or the unclear calculation of the 6 foot versus the 60/40, and I'm not a math guy, but there's something like the transitive properties of mathematics and the high, do you've got to multiply first, and then you add and subtract, and it seemed like there was some inconsistent math going on. So I think that to the extent that we can clarify and clear that up, and I think it's a good idea to maybe even consider trying to reorganize that as we get to the next iteration of the guidelines.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, Paul had his hand up. Yep.
Yeah, another issue that I can't figure out, I don't know anybody can figure out today, is we have, hundreds of our members that own empty lots, right? And the concern I have, and again, I'm just being cautious, that any changes here fundamentally change the house that they either thought they could build, they were told they could build, whatever. And I mean, we have lots that are sell for 100,000. We have a lot for sale for $4 million. And I guess I want to make sure that we're not fundamentally changing. They thought they could build a 3,200 square foot house, and the rules now will have 2,500. That's
Yeah, I don't think there's nothing in these guidelines, Paul, that change any of the fundamental measures that frame what you can build on a house, on a lot. we didn't change the impervious coverage. We didn't change the size of the footprint that was in there. We didn't change grading. We didn't change setbacks. We didn't change, any of the baseline measures relative to any of that. And I was very careful to, and Christine and Russ know this, to clarify that with Andrew McVeigh, just to make sure we knew what our boundaries were, and there is no risk there.
Okay, well, that's good, and that these sizes have been the same for 20 years, or what is the term?
Yeah, I for as long as I've been around, which is 2004. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean the fundamentals. I mean, there've been the few things that have changed over time, and I think the 6 foot rule was one of those. And in my research, I went back to define when it was changed, and it was changed. It was changed more recently than that I think we might have understood. There was a application of it that was generally understood, but it was guideline. It was a guideline addition. I think as recently as 21. So. And I think this is the other thing that we need to work on is getting more precisely definition of the things that are quote understood versus the things that are stated. And there are a lot of things that are understood that are not necessarily stated.
So the 6 foot rule was put in 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, I guess.
Yeah, I can't remember right off the top of my head which edition it was, but through my research, I think I determined it was in. I don't know if it was edition 21 or 2021, but it was in that time frame. Now, I mean, Paul, in one of the things that has resulted this is when stage 1 and stage 2 were merged, there was a pretty Herculean effort to merge the guidelines. A lot of the confusion that we've been dealing with is just, and some of the things that need to be cleaned up are a process of when those two guidelines were put together. And I think none of it is in my mind super problematic. It's just more clarification because the intent what didn't change and the substance didn't change, but the format changed.
I just wanted to bring up one thing for the board, and this is for the upcoming year, relative to the issue that Paul just brought up. Individuals who purchase property and who want a sense of how large a house they can put on it. I had the experience in the last month of speaking to a brand new homeowner who had gone through the process of falling in love with the island, purchasing a smaller lot, and going home to his local architect and building this beautiful dream and designing this beautiful dream house. All of which, once they initiated their work with the art, found out that it was not going to be possible. So he had to go back and start over again and spend those monies again and really take into consideration the guidelines. When I asked what information he, as a brand new property owner, not a homeowner, but a property owner, had received, he indicated he was totally unaware, and the people he was working with were unaware of guidelines. We don't have to do it now, but one question I have is, when a piece of property is sold, is there anything that is sent to that property owner that says, be advised, as you start your construction dream, these are the things that you need to know are part and parcel of the construction process here on the island. I don't know that the new homeowners packet does that, but I think that it would prohibit, that it would avoid a lot of the angst and confusion from people who are just starting the process and they're now dealing with these lots. I don't know that we give them guidance right up front. Does anybody know?
Well, I don't know what we do. Well, first of all, they probably should have wondered about that.
But they
However,
did.
I think that's we need to get to them. I agree with you 100%. They probably should shoulder some of the blame. And obviously, anytime you buy property, you ought to know what the guidelines are. But that's a different issue. But I think it also, coming at it from another direction, I think it also shows. I mean, Terry's been here 20 some years, been involved in the ARC, and he believes the guidelines are complicated.
Mhm.
So it being around DC for 54 years, thankfully I got out. Reminds me of working with the government. Like, well, if you haven't done this for 20 years, you don't know what, because the rules are so complicated.
Mhm.
I mean, our goal should be to have guidelines that are clear, that are easy to get through, and that a new property owner and a new architect should be able to pick them up and understand, not go, oh, that's on page 87, So I think that's, Betty, to sort of to piggyback off of your point, that ought to be one of the goals. It's clearer.
I
So
totally agree. I totally agree. My only point was we should not allow just an absence of information to a brand new property owner. I'm not suggesting that giving them the guidelines is going to be an easy task, but I think they do need to know that there are parameters that have to be met
Right.
before they engage an architect. That's all I'm saying.
Betty,
And
ultimately, like Terry and I held this builder meeting, the next step into the new year, as I've talked to you all about, is holding kind of a broker summit and trying to really even go beforehand, before they even get to the designer, architect, builder phase. They start with a reputable broker agent that we can possibly have the same kind of summit to where we can fill their heads with knowledge, even though we know they know all of this, but give them the tools to where they're able to hand this off to our potential new members without feeling like they're scaring people away, that it's so much.
Sure.
Education is
I agree
half
with
the
that.
battle. It's scary when you don't have the education.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely.
And to add to what Christine's saying, I think the education piece is something that will develop. This is adopted as far as simplification. We talked about developing a video in the first quarter that might help with this in the proper way. And we've also discussed internally doing some more group orientations that could be meaningful for the new residents. So all that can play into that, Betty.
Yep.
If I could just comment, one of the things that Terry did here that was very useful, it's already been referred to, is he has I think it's a 2-page summary of the various requirements, the 25% footprint, the 40% disturbed, the impervious, all of that, giving the homeowners or property owner, the new property owner, something like that, that's a 2-page summary that says you should be aware of some of these basic limitations on what you can build on your property, and have a disclaimer in there that says, and oh, by the way, this is not all encompassing. You do need to read the guidelines, but you should be aware at least of this. I thought, that summary that Terry did was excellent. And I think that would be a good thing to provide every new property owner to make them aware there are limits, of what they can build on the property. So, and I think, Terry, that's your plan in this year is to have a consolidated place in the guidelines that all that is stated, and then they can go elsewhere to read in greater detail, but that would seem like a very good approach to me.
Yeah, Christine challenged it as a guidelines for dummies or cliff notes, and so I
I
think
knew that tagline
yeah.
would never be forgotten.
Yeah, no, so I mean, John, I completely concur. It's just so if you wanted a really quick tutorial on what do these guidelines really say, putting an executive summary of the guidelines up front where it's all in one place is the intent.
I love it. absolutely love that. All right, do we have more questions for Terry while we're still taking up his very valuable time? I don't hear any more questions. All right, I would like to be the first to thank Terry very much. He really has worked very hard with us to get a jump start on this. More work to come. I shouldn't have said that out loud in front of him, but yeah, everything is wonderful thus far, and we thank you, Terry.
So is the process, I mean, in the past, at least 2 years ago when the guidelines were rewritten, the process is for the proposed changes to be published to the membership for a period of time for
No,
comment.
these changes don't require, these only require adoption of the board.
I know, yeah, no, I understand
Not
that.
not a vote or a consensus of the membership.
No, that's right. But
Yeah.
for example, in 22, 23, those guidelines, the process was the committee drafted them, the board reviewed them. They were published on our website as draft, and we received comments from the membership before the board took final action. I think that's probably a pretty good.
Well, and Paul, that was when the guidelines were being completely re-adopted because of the merger of stage 1 and stage 2s. Those were not incremental guideline changes. Historically, incremental guideline changes, which happen every year, that are little tweaks here and there, are simply voted on by the ARC. They come to the board. The board either agrees with them or disagrees with them, and they are then become official for that following year.
Well,
if we want to start to apply these, we need the board to adopt them in order to start to apply them as soon as 2 weeks from now when the ARCA meets.
yeah, no, I understand that, but I think you're at least the changes to the guidelines that were made 2 years ago. They were sent out to the membership, posted on the website, and it was about a month. We took comments. I don't know what all the comments were, and then the board voted on it. So it wasn't all the way back to stage 1 and stage 2. Well, you were on that committee. I was on that committee. That's what happened. I think.
Yeah, I defer to the board as to when they adopt them and what process you guys.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No.
I'm just trying to clarify what the covenants say is necessary.
Yeah.
Covenants,
No. We agree on that.
Yeah.
And I think
Okay.
the process of now that we to take this language, put it into a red line in the document, and send it out is, I mean, to allow our members to review them and provide any input, I think would be helpful.
No, I defer. That's up to you guys. Not beyond my pay grade here.
I guess I would, I would kind of echo what Terry said. What was done in 22, 23 was a massive rewrite. I mean, we reduced the guidelines from, I think, 144 pages down to 70 some pages. There were many, many, many changes made. And it was just a much larger effort than what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here are changes to to effectively 1 or 2 paragraphs on 3 or 4 pages of the guidelines. I don't see, personally, I don't see the value in delaying this further. That's my
Well, we
opinion.
could always get a motion pending written approval from Andy.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I didn't understand that. I don't think we need outside counsel to tell us what we can and we can't do here. I think
Okay.
that I think we're well within our purview to go ahead and make these changes.
I think
But
so
I
too.
but I do think that given that the ARC, or not the ARC, given that the board has received this just in the last couple of days, and the membership has not, is seeing it for the first time today. I'd be in favor of holding this over for a couple weeks so we can digest it and not send it out for any type of large scale comment, but that we could take some feedback and some input, and also give us as board members the chance to look through it in further detail to make sure that we have a solid understanding of this.
Could I suggest then that we put this forth from the board, if necessary, in a letter to our membership, just saying we are making certain clarifications. Any comments can be received. But, when I think about the last couple of board meetings, the board was perfectly ready to propose on its own, making a change, voting it in, and being done with it. Here we have
with a sense of urgency. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, here we have had, we commissioned Terry to do this. He has done it. He has road tested it. If we don't have objections to it, I'm not quite sure how the layperson is going to get educated on it and provide valuable input. I think what we should be doing is communicating to our membership what the change is and the extent of it.
I would like to bring up one other point, is that we will have 2 new board members tomorrow. Would we be remiss not to wait until tomorrow and get input from 2 new board members? And I'm just thinking this right now. I hadn't thought of this before. Obviously, we did commission Terry to do this. I think he's done an outstanding job, and I like it. I'm good with waiting for the 2 new board members, if that's what you're thinking. We could handle this real quick once they get on board and we brought them up to speed. Anyway, up to you all. It's just throwing another wrench into it.
Well,
I just don't think that this is of the order of magnitude. We're not making changes to the rules. We're clarifying terminology. And I don't understand the value of putting it out to the membership. If we had an impact on changed parameters, that would be one thing. But we asked, I don't understand.
Only other thing I will add is this is the body that we have had the conversation with for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
To change to a new set of group that we're going to dialogue this with for the scale of this matter, to me seems unnecessary. And I paced this through at a fevered pitch to get this done quickly for this particular board, when the board was apparently very urgently wanting to change it themselves. So I find it disheartening that the board's not prepared to take it up and vote on it today, one way or the other. Vote it up, vote it down, whatever. But this is the process that we set out for over the last 6 months.
It is. Any other further board comments about this?
Yeah, a couple clarifications. The couple months ago, what was presented as a resolution was not a change in any of the, it was just direction from the board as to how to interpret the guidelines. There was no change in the guidelines. So that was, and secondly, Betty, when that was presented in November, it was given to the board a couple days before, the day before the meeting, and you thought that was inappropriate, that there wasn't enough for the board to even study it. And in this case, I received it this morning. And then thirdly, I don't really understand the concept of not getting input from our members. That's who we represent. They know a lot more about this and have a lot of vested interest in this. And this, just to make sure we're not missing something, I don't see why waiting a few weeks and letting our members understand what we're doing. Again, from presentation to approval in 2-3 weeks is not much of a burden to the island.
Paul, this is a total reversal of the direction you have provided this board over the last several months. You yourself have presented a motion that you did not distribute to the entire board, but you brought it in a piece of paper to the board and asked us to vote on it. You continue to pressure that we get some expert advice, that we make a decision, and you totally agreed, as did the board, that Terry's offer to do this and prepare it for discussion today was the way to go. Now you seem to think that all the members have got to weigh in on a wording change, and I don't understand where you're coming from. You're flip-flopping on how to do this, and I think we're kind of just jerking Terry around.
I don't think that's neither accurate nor fair, but that's, I guess, just a style issue. I guess you understand this a lot better than I, and you understand the receiving a document in the morning and 2 hours later approving a change in the guidelines seems doesn't
I
seem.
think you could have looked
Okay,
at your email
not to
sooner.
not to nitpick, but could we ask Dora when the documents were posted? I know it was at least a couple of days ago.
The presentation went out last night. I received it this morning.
Yeah, but the presentation is simply a high level restatement of what was already in the documents.
He
What's in the
produced it, and it was on the board site.
Yeah.
Okay. I would say, I, for one, was thrilled that Terry agreed to do some speed work and get something done here in order for us to, and I remember last month I said, we can just at least get it a day before to look this over. Now, that was me saying that. I'd appreciate it. This is just a tip of a big iceberg that they're going to be working on, and I like the changes. It's not huge, but it's great changes. So I would say, I personally am ready to. I'm good with voting on this. If there's someone who wants to make a motion,
I move that we vote on the proposal that Terry has made to clarify the ARC language.
okay, Betty made the motion. Is there a
So,
second?
Betty, I would only correct it that the ARC is making this, not.
I'm sorry, the
Yeah.
ARC.
ARC, not
A
just
and
Terry.
B, both
Yeah.
committees.
I would make, let me change it then. I would make a motion that we approve the recommendation from the ARC committees to modify the language.
Okay, Betty
I-
made the motion. Is there a second?
This is Steve. I'll second that, just in maybe to ease anyone's concerns about this. If we find that we run into the law of unintended consequences later, then we can always go ahead and make further modifications at the next meeting. I think this is
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No, and if I could say something, because I was hoping to do it before the vote, but I don't think it is appropriate to
Do this without
make
the members. I
changes
hear
of
you.
this magnitude without any input from our property owners. The process that I recall, and I know has happened for the Bald Head Association to change its guidelines is to get the recommendation from the ARC or whatever committee. Last time it was a special committee. Present it to the membership for comment, and then at the next board meeting to review those comments and make changes if necessary. I understand the need to get this thing done, and I think the work Terry has done seems to be
Yeah.
So,
I just don't understand why we are in a rush to change how we have included our membership in the past for changes to the guidelines.
so
Can I make
as
a comment about that?
No, the vote's already been taken, so it's irrelevant.
Oh, I know. All right, then I'll leave it alone. There's going to be much more heavy work being done here in the near future, and it will be significant to where it would go to a vote to the membership.
Okay, can I make a statement?
It doesn't need to get.
Okay, let me just, I have to correct something as a matter of fact. I've been on the board for 6 years. I've been on committees for 2 years prior to that. As a matter of fact, every year, the ARC proposes changes to the guidelines and sends them to the board. One time out of the last 6 years, because it was a very major change, those changes were also published and we invited member comment. In 5 of the 6 years, we did not do that. It is not a matter of course that we do that. So I'm sorry, what Paul is saying is simply not correct as a matter of fact.
We didn't change the guidelines last year.
We change the guidelines every year, Paul, every year. Every year there are some changes. They may be small, but every year there are changes. So,
I don't believe we changed, the board voted on changing the guidelines last year. And if
26 to 27.
I'm wrong, I can be proven wrong, but I don't think there were any changes to the guidelines last year. So, and 2 years ago, we changed the guidelines and we asked for member approval.
Christine?
I did what you asked me to do.
Christine? There's a comment from one of the members. Is it okay if I read it?
Dora, we've already taken the vote on this, so I think it's probably in our interest to just
I've already seen the comments, Dora. Thank you so much.
Forward.
That's what I was asking.
Okay, so where are we?
It's passed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we, and the question I would have is, do we in any way publicize this for the benefit of our contractors and for anyone else's interest?
Of course. Since this is in public session and we've passed this, and we might even put a little presentation of Terry's, maybe a little shorter, into a compass or something. Or yeah, we got to do a compass. Yeah, we'll get it out. We'll put a link is what we'll do.
Annual meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, well, of course, annual meeting.
And I'm sure if
something.
people don't like it, we'll hear from them.
Yeah, you're darn right. That will happen. That's going to be up or down no matter what all the time. Okay. Again, thank you, Terry. We really appreciate it. And I will see and hear from you tomorrow.
Okay. I do need some clarity
Terry.
as to what we're doing tomorrow, but I'll follow up with you. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
We'll definitely,
Thank you,
Dora,
Terry.
Russ, and myself will follow up with you. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Right. Bye. Okay. Number 6, annual meeting. My notes. Am I doing this one? I can start it off. Yeah. Well, like most of everything that else that has happened this week, here again tomorrow, Russ and I will find ourselves in this little room for the annual meeting. Is anyone else on island?
I am, but I'm scared to death I won't get back up the hill to get to my house.
You're a smart woman. Stay put. That was not a fun drive today, and it will freeze up again overnight. It's an early morning. So again, here, Russ and I will be here again tomorrow morning in this little quaint office, and we'll have all of you remotely. We've had agreement, I believe, from every island entity that is going to have their own kind of little slideshow, little short 5-minute blurb, and that would be the Village, the Conservancy, BHI, Shoals Club, not Chris Webb, Travis from the chapel. Old Baldy, and who's coming from the chapel? Mary Mears, maybe? Anyone coming from the chapel? Oh, okay. So we've got everyone that's going to join in, and basically for our annual meeting weekend, everyone has their own meetings, but we always give the opportunity while we're putting together the vote tally to have everyone just give a few minutes of their time to talk to everyone about what they can expect. For an extended version of that, certainly you can go to the different meetings all over the island. Couple will be in the spring, some have been delayed, some will happen Sunday. So we've got a lot of great information we're going to share with everyone. So I would ask everyone to look at your last compass, and you can click on the link to join. We'd love everyone to join. I want to also tell y'all that every year after the annual meeting that evening, we go to the club. You join us for the Smith Island silent auction. It's a great event. I look forward to it every year. It is very unfortunate that yesterday, midday, speaking to the village and with the CEO, David Sawyer of the club, we came to a decision that because of the dropping number of participants, significant, also because not knowing what the roads would be like that evening, not knowing how much of a staff they would have there, and not sure if they would have the availability of food to serve us with the lack of possible staff and the staff possibly leaving early. After Russ and I speaking about it with the village and with David Sawyer, we came to the conclusion that it would be a good idea to postpone. I asked Russ to relay that to our chair of Education and Recreation, Betty Robinson, who I'm sure was very disappointed. I haven't had a chance to talk to Betty about it yet. Very disappointed, however, understood that this is larger than us attending a party. So we will all be sad to miss that tomorrow evening, but hopefully all of you understand it's a decision made for a whole, not a few. And I'll miss seeing you guys tomorrow night, but I look forward to seeing when it'll be maybe better attended. So just wanted to share that. Anything else about particulars with the annual meeting, I'm going to let Russ and Dora fill you in on. Russ?
No, thank you, Christine. I think that the group that is charged with speaking, the different island entities are prepared to do this via Zoom. We have reached out to them multiple times, and they all have prepared their presentation, which is including in the deck. So we plan to move forward with that virtually, and that's the target right now. So thank you very much.
I just have a question, and this is really just for the BHA folks. When will we get the full deck of the slides that we're covering?
By the end of the day, we've got a few minor tweaks to make on that.
Okay.
Okay. They're coming along pretty well. Kim was waiting for a little bit of information. That's partially just coming from everyone, and I do know that some of you have your own scripts that you're working on, and so she's just trying to figure out what to put on the slides, kind of thing. But she's worked really hard on that, so thank you all so much for getting that turned around for her in a timely manner. Any other questions on the annual meeting?
Yeah, we've got Hey Russ, how many votes did we get? Are we casting? Was it the board?
7.
No, total.
Yeah, Paul, that's going to be reconciled by a little bit later, so
Before noon.
we'll share that discussion, I know, as we get into the later parts of the meeting.
I guess my question is, do we have
Everybody,
the tallies in for that or not? I'm trying to
I
remind
don't speak.
the board to get their stuff in so we can cast those
Yeah.
votes appropriately. What was it,
I guess
47?
the better question is, has everybody, done what they were supposed to do? I.e. get back to Diane Maceras,
Yes.
before noon, which is
Yes.
TikTok.
Yes.
Betty, yes.
Yep.
Me, yes.
Yes, I have.
I
Okay,
have.
Paul, yes. Okay, thank you, Joe. Mr. Smalley.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes.
John.
No, I have not. I've got to scan them still.
Okay.
I'll send them over though before noon.
All right, thank you, John. All right,
I
well,
did
it
have,
is.
hey, Christine, I did have a
Yes.
question though.
Please.
Do we have, the post office has been closed for some number of days. What do we do about ballots that arrive late because of that?
Yeah, so that was a big discussion. We spoke to council, because, I can read the exact words, because of what it says on our proxy ballot. Sorry, I should have had that in front of me in case somebody had a question. Yeah. It says, sorry, I want to make sure I get this right, word for word, verbatim. I have it right here somewhere, I know I do. Hold on, John, sorry. Oh, here it is. Now, this proxy must be received by the BHA office by 4 p.m. on Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025, in order to be counted. So with that being said, and after speaking to council, quite frankly, anything that didn't come by then, there could be, well, Russ and I spoke about, we all know Bald Head Island mail. So if you were voting by proxy, quite frankly, you probably got it out a couple of weeks ago. But with that being said, because we just cannot get the mail, we've done everything we could just to see if there was a couple of stragglers, and we can't. So,
Christine, didn't people have the option of taking a picture of their proxy and emailing it to Diane?
well, what people can do, no, we can't do that, can we?
We have to look at this language on it.
Yeah.
Betty, many people have done it that way.
Yeah, I was going to say they don't have to use the mail. They could have just.
Yeah, there's been several people
emailed
that
it.
reached out to Diane and asked if they could email the proxy. They did email the proxy, and
Yeah.
either Diane or myself printed them off for them to go into the
Okay.
binder
Okay.
just as if they had been mailed.
Okay. No, I just wanted to ask the question because other people have asked me. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, okay, and thank you for that question. Any other thoughts or questions before we close out the, meeting? No?
None here.
Okay, all right, it is Friday, 11:11 a.m., and I call this public session, closed. Do I have a second?
I have a second.
Are we going to take like 10 minutes or something before we go into executive?
Yes, sorry, John, please do take 10 minutes. I've
Okay.
got a couple of emails anyway, so that would be good. 10 minutes and we'll pop back into executive.
11:30.
Okay.
Yeah, 11:30 would be great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jim.
Thank you, Terry.
Oh, you're welcome.